A familiar face is back in Gainesville as Dan Mullen has been hired at the University of Florida to guide the Gators into 2018 and beyond. We bring in David Waters from Gators Breakdown to, of course, help us break down the hire and what it means for Florida football. Dave, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Mark. Doing good. Gator Nation's excited about Dan Mullen returning.
Yeah, so the excitement has to stem from a few different places. So unlike Jim McElwain and Will Muschamp, here's a guy that's done it in the SEC as the head guy, not just a coordinator. Jim McElwain, of course, had a decent stay there in winning some games at Colorado State, but just a different animal when you talk about a guy that's proven that he can succeed with less resources, less talent than what he should be able to do in Gainesville.
Yeah, Mark, you're right. It's somebody who knows the SEC, and more importantly, it's not somebody who knows Florida. You mentioned a familiar face. He was the offensive coordinator. He's been in the SEC for 13 years. I mean, you go back to his offensive coordinator days at Florida, 4 years there. There's 9 years at Mississippi State. He knows the conference. He knows the SEC. So now you talk about Florida needing a new coach, and what direction do they need to go? Well, they need somebody who knows what Florida is, the type of athletes you can recruit at Florida, the type of athletes that, he knows the type of athletes that it takes to win at a place like Florida. He wasn't getting that at Mississippi State. I don't want to sit here and say he wasn't happy at Mississippi State. I really think he was, but there were limitations at that spot. And you can recruit 3 and 4 stars, but you can't get enough of the 4 stars and 5 stars. You got your limitations there. He never beat Bama in his time there. Had a so-so record against Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. Those are the programs that recruited better than Mississippi State. But go back and look at it. He had a winning record against Ole Miss. It was a winning record against Texas A&M. They joined the conference in 2012. Yes, he didn't beat Alabama, but I'm not sure how many other coaches could have done what he done at Mississippi State. He was limited in coaching staff, limited in recruits that he could get. So at least he's proven without the talent that he could get at Florida, he can at least coach him up and be competitive in the SEC. And I think that's what the administration was looking for.
David Waters joining us from Gators Breakdown to talk the Dan Mullen hire at Florida. Do you think also that the offensive mindset and the offensive pedigree played into it as well? So you get maybe a great defensive coach, he comes in and you win games, and that's the bottom line. Hey, get us to SEC championship games, and that's what it all matters. But that the fans might be a little bit more excited since the offense has been such a struggle for so long, and you get a guy that has proven it on that side of the ball.
Absolutely. Of course, they went out and got an offensive guy in Jim McElwain after the Will Muschamp disaster. But it turns out it needed to be more than just an offensive guy. It needed to be an offensive guy in the SEC. But kind of like combining both of the thoughts that we've kind of just shared so far. Yes, it wasn't. I mean, look at his quarterback development. And we sit here and say, look, Florida hasn't had a quarterback since Tim Tebow. Well, you know what? They also haven't had an offensive coordinator since Dan Mullen. So now he comes back, and can he rekindle what his time was at Florida? So yes, he had the Tim Tebows of the world and the Percy Harvin of the world, and Lewis Murphy, David Nelson, and Aaron Hernandez, Jeff Demps, Chris Rainey. You could name those names, but he proven he can make something happen with Alex Smith at Utah and Dak Prescott at Mississippi State and Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State. Florida's had a problem with the quarterback position ever since he's left. So it's a combination of getting the offensive coordinator, the offensive mind that we know can work in this conference, and a guy that can help us where we've struggled for so long at the quarterback position. So, and I know you and I, we're going to hit on this later, but it's going to be interesting to see what he does at this quarterback position for Florida. Does he see something on the roster he can already work with? A lot of people don't believe so. Is it a true freshman that comes in and he builds the offense right away with that guy? Or is a grad transfer in the works as well? So there are different ways to look at this, but at least I think Scott Strickland knew. He worked with him at Mississippi State. He got to see it up close. He knows this guy can develop quarterbacks and build an offense that works in the SEC.
David, that has to be the most painful, anticlimactic Florida State game that you've ever suffered through, I would think. Considering both sides. So, of course, you had the down season, which you lost to Georgia Southern, finished, that was a 4-8 season as well,
yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, you can compare it there, but Florida State, I'm sure, was good that year. It was just a few years ago. But I was watching that game for much of the time. And I'm seeing, first of all, it's a noon kickoff. Secondly, you've got portions of the stands where I saw parts of sections that were empty. It was just, man, to see those two schools with all that talent and all that talent around them in the high school ranks sitting there at 4 and 6 each and on the same field, that you may have just been thinking, hey, let's just get through this season. Florida fans thinking this is supposed to be our game against Florida State to mean something to the big rivalry week. Let's just get this game over, get to the offseason, get our head man in place. And the Dan Mullen hire just had to be a boost in the arm after suffering for 3 months.
It absolutely was. And, Mark, going into that FSU game, this was looking at it, hey, this is a chance we can finally break the streak. But, it just, as bad as Florida State was, Florida was even worse. And, I mean, you know what? Florida was in the game. If it wasn't for Felipe Franks' pick sixes all the game, Florida still had a chance to win that game. Hey, I guess you could say, hey, Florida finally scored an offensive touchdown against FSU. So maybe that's one positive we can take out of the game. But it was an ugly game. And there was, even on Saturday, this was going from the Chip Kelly saga where Florida maybe thought they were more in play for Chip Kelly than they actually were. We heard word Saturday before the game that Chip Kelly was now going to UCLA. So more fans, even though there was a game being played, more fans were in tune to what's happened, what's next with the coaching search. And then Saturday night rolls around and Willie Taggart's the hot name going around. And we wake up Sunday morning and, oh, lo and behold, it's a surprise. Here's Dan Mullen. So, and I liked it. My original list of coaches when Jim McElwain was fired, Dan Mullen was in my top 2 or 3 just because of his familiarity with the SEC, his familiarity with Florida, him being able to build an offense in the SEC, him being able to develop quarterbacks. I thought Dan Mullen would have been a great hire for Florida. And once it was made, and he went through his press conference in the car wash at Florida, he was, I mean, as soon as he stepped off the plane, he was gator chomping to the media and the cameras and all the fans that were there. He had a smile on his face all day. He said the right things in the press conference. Even some of the Gator fans that weren't so excited about the Dan Mullen hire, after the press conference and all the media obligations that he had to do, some of them came around that, I don't blame some of them for still, some still point out his SEC West record and his record in the SEC and his record against ranked opponents. But look, it's at Mississippi State. There's a caveat there. So you can wonder, and look, it is a legit question, I guess if you should say. But when he goes to Florida and starts getting 4 and 5 stars and starts recruiting better, we've already seen how good of a coach he can be. Tie that in with recruiting, and let's see where it goes.
It's arguably the most difficult place to recruit to and to win in the SEC Western Division. You could argue between Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Mississippi State, but that's definitely the group that's the most difficult to win. So for him to come close to going 500 in the SEC, finish 23 games over 500, go to bowl games each and every year there at Mississippi State, I think it's a credit to him. And look at the game against Alabama this year. You can say, yeah, they lost at the Tide again, but man, had Bama down by 7 in the fourth quarter and needed some special plays by Calvin Ridley and Jalen Hurts for the Tide to pull that one out in Starkville. And, of course, he loses his quarterback in the Egg Bowl. Otherwise, he's probably a 9-3 football team to finish his career there at Mississippi State.
And Mark, I had Florida, go ahead. And before you go there, I had a stat in our last Gators Breakdown episode where I looked at all 9 games against Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. It was, I believe, against Alabama, it was an average score of 31-10. Okay, it's Alabama, the best team in the nation. Average number 1 recruiting classes the whole time Dan Mullen was there. Auburn, LSU, both averaged top 10 recruiting classes in those 9 years. He was within a touchdown all 9 games as an average against those 2 teams. Averaged equal to Texas A&M in the 6 games he's played against them, and had a higher average score against Ole Miss in the 9 games that they played. So, even those schools that were out recruiting him in Mississippi State, it was still a touchdown or less, or actually a winning average against those teams of Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. So he kept it competitive within a touchdown in those 9 years he was there at Mississippi State.
And Dave, you kind of could take it for granted that at a place like Florida, you should get the hire right. You should have basically your selection of whoever you want for the most part. You got the facilities, you got everything in line. You're an elite program. But look what's going on at Tennessee. And just to make sure that you've got a solid guy in play, a guy that you know that's not going to screw it up either in terms of football or off the field stuff, that you've got a solid guy that he may not be a legend. Who knows? Maybe he's certainly got the situation in place that he can certainly further his career. But at least you got a guy that is a known commodity, and Tennessee's out there just twisting in the wind right now.
And Mark, it's probably, and I feel sorry for, like Mike, our good Tennessee fan, of what having to deal with this. But in a way, Florida started this. Dan Mullen, in a way, it looked like he might have been going to Tennessee before Florida stepped in and made him an offer, and Florida was the place he wanted to go. So if Tennessee gets Dan Mullen, the whole stuff with Schiano never happens, and the chain reaction since that event probably doesn't go on with missing on Jeff Brom and all these other coaches out there that way. So, if Tennessee could have got Dan Mullen on Saturday or Sunday, and all this is a moot point, and Florida's probably still searching for a coach. I'm not sure. But, once Florida made the offer to Dan Mullen, it kind of set the wheels in motion of what we've seen at Tennessee.